So you've gotten hurt at work and pretty severe injury. And now maybe you had surgery because of your injuries, and now your doctors released you to maximum medical improvement. You've had your functional capacity exam. You've got some permanent restrictions, which unfortunately say you can't go back to your old job. And now the insurance company has approached you, and it looks like they want to settle your claim. But before they do that, they send you this weird thing. It's like an authorization of some kind, and the adjuster is telling you, you need this so we can do an MSA, or Medicare Set-Aside. And you're like, what the heck is that? The whole thing looks fishy. This authorization is purporting to give some company you've never heard of your medical records, access to all your medical records. So what's going on? I'm Joe Miller, workers' compensation attorney in both Virginia and North Carolina, and that's what we're going to talk about today, which is the subject of Medicare Set-Asides in workers' compensation settlements. And it's important for you to understand this. Now, a lot of my colleagues especially, I know, if you're watching this, your eyes are already glassing over and you're getting your pillows out because it's a pretty boring subject, to be honest with you. However, I'm going to try to make it as simple as I can so that you can, I think it's important that you understand why this is important, why this needs to be done, and how it fits into your workers' compensation case. So what is a Medicare Set-Aside, first of all? What is it about? It is a prohibition, essentially, against double dipping. And basically what it says is, if you're going to have a settlement, one component of which is going to be, usually, it's a larger settlement, your future medical care for your work injuries. Because remember, most workers' comp injuries involved, especially in Virginia, you're going to have something called a lifetime medical awards. And a lifetime medical award means just what it says. They're supposed to cover you for the rest of your life. So what you can't do, what Medicare comes and says is, well, you can't go get that pile of money that represents a portion of your settlement that's for future workers' compensation treatment, and then turn right around immediately thereafter and say, okay, well now I've qualified for Medicare. Now Medicare is going to pick up the cost of that treatment. I'm just going to keep the money for myself, whatever the workers' comp pay me. That you cannot do. So what you have to do is take that money that you've been offered for, that's the portion of your case that represents your future medical care, and set it aside, hence the name Medicare Set-Aside, so that you are essentially, what you're doing is what they call it is protecting Medicare's interests. And really, when you think about it, what you're really doing is protecting your fellow taxpayers' interests, because guess who has to pay for Medicare? All the taxpayers. So if people are paying for other people's care that was supposed to be covered by a private insurance company, that's not fair, really, to your fellow payors into the system. So that's why we have this concept of Medicare Set-Aside. So to break it down, okay, we basically have two main categories of this whole concept of Medicare Set-Aside. The first category that is the most strict is if you are a current Medicare recipient, you're already in the system as receiving Medicare coverage, or you're about to, all right? So let's take these and break these down. We're going to put some stuff on the screen to try to take them one at a time. So A, under this very strict category, you are 65 years old or older, which means you qualify for Medicare, obviously, and your whole workers' comp settlement, not just the medical part, is worth over $25,000, okay? That's category A of the strict folks. B, you're on Social Security Disability, or SSDI as we like to call it, and your whole comp case is worth over $25,000, and it's been over 29 months since you've been determined to be disabled, okay? And so likely, what that means is you're going to automatically qualify for Medicare under the SSDI rules and the Medicare rules. And so you could be almost any age to most folks that qualify for SSDI are over 50, but, you're going to be somewhere, younger than 65, more likely than not. And so those folks also are going to be in this strict category. In other words, you're qualified a different way for Medicare because you're disabled. And it's been over 29 months since you've been determined to be disabled. So that's another way you qualify for Medicare. And then we have a third category, which is you're not a current Medicare recipient, but you've applied for SSDI, which means you have an expectation that at some point in the next 30 months, you're going to qualify for Medicare. If you're over 62 and a half, that's automatically going to apply to you. And the value of your case is worth over $250,000. So the other two where you're already qualified, it only requires $25,000. And this one, where you haven't qualified yet, requires a $250,000 overall value of your claim, the medical and the other part, the indemnity, weekly checks part of your settlement. Folks, in these categories, if you want to settle your medical part of your claim along with the regular part of your claim, which we refer to generally as a full and final settlement of your workers' compensation claim, which means that full means it's both the indemnity part of your case, which may consist of, the value, some portion of the value of your future comp checks, plus the medical part, plus maybe you might even have some permanent partial impairment in there that gets thrown into the mix also. People in these stricter categories, why do I say they're stricter? Because these folks have to get, not only do they have to get a Medicare Set-Aside report, a formal report from a company that does an analysis of your projected future care for the rest of your life for your work injuries, but that report must be submitted to an outfit called CMS. And CMS is short for the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. They're over at www.cms.gov. That's www.cms.gov. I'm going to put a link in the comments. It'll take you to the page that talks about all of this stuff. Much of it goes over the same information. But what does CMS do? CMS will review that report and determine if it's appropriate for your case. All right? So, and remember, again, I said before at the beginning of this little discussion that the insurance company might be sending you an authorization to sign. Well, that's the purpose of the authorization, to let one of these Medicare Set-Aside companies who do these workups on your future care have access to your medical records so they can do their workup. So what is this MSA report that we're talking about? What does it have in it? And who does it? Well, typically they're done by these companies that are hired by the insurance company. The good news is the insurance company, workers' comp insurance company, will usually pay for it. What do they look at? Okay, well, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to rate your life expectancy. There's some laws in each state that allow you to assume an average life expectancy for you. And what they will do is they'll take into account your other medical conditions. For instance, if you have diabetes, if you have high blood pressure, if you have other medical conditions that may unfortunately shorten your life, that's going to rate your life expectancy as a little less than the average life expectancy. So they factor all that in. They come up with a life expectancy. Why do they do that? Because remember, they're projecting the future cost out for your injuries, for your work injuries, for the remainder of your life. You need additional surgeries. The doctors say you need additional surgery. They're going to factor that in. If you're on pain meds, they're going to figure out the annual cost of that and project it out for the rest of your life. You have hardware in there in your body. From you had, let's say, a back fusion or something like that. There may be a medical monitoring cost for that each year. Perhaps you need an MRI or you need some x-rays every few years. There's cost for that. And all these are put into this report. These companies will also often suggest the means by which you are to be paid this money. Let's say the MSA totals $100,000 just to make it easy, right? So and let's say you have 15 years of life expectancy. So that would be $6,666.66 per year for the next 15 years. But where they usually do it is there's seed money for the first year. That's $20,000. So really it's only $80,000 over 14 years you're dealing with. So after that, it's going to be $5,714.29 each year. Typically, these insurance companies are going to do something. They're going to buy an annuity, okay, to pay this thing. The annuity may only, through another insurance company, the annuity may only it costs them $70,000, right? But it's going to pay you $100,000 by the time we get to the end of the 15 years because annuities involve investments that pay out money. So it's a good deal for them. It's a good deal for you. And you get your money and they pay less than they need to pay. That money has to be put in a separate account whenever you receive it, okay? You want to label it a Medicare Set-Aside account in your bank. Every year, CMS is going to send you a one-page report that you must fill out and account for every penny you've spent on your work injury. So if you go over those amounts, then Medicare is going to step in and cover you, okay, assuming that you've documented everything nicely. What I always recommend to folks is to get a debit card for that account, right? Only for that account, and use that debit card every time you need to spend money on your work injuries, all right? And that way, at the end of the year, you can get your statement from your bank, and you have a very easy way to add up all that stuff and put it in the report. Again, it's only a one-page report you have to submit every year. Well, what happens if you don't do this? Well, that means that Medicare is never going to cover your work injuries. So that means that, 10, 15, let's say you make it 10 years from now, you used up all the money and you haven't used it for your work injuries. Well, that means that Medicare is going to assume that you blew it and that you used it for things other than what you're supposed to use it for, and means that you didn't protect Medicare's interest, and they will never, ever cover you for your work injuries. God forbid you need additional surgery 10 years out from now or 5 years out from now, and if you haven't protected their interests and shown them that you protected their interest on an annual basis, they're going to assume that you're not protecting their interest, and they're not going to cover you, ever. You might be asking, why should I trust this insurance company or this reporting company that they've hired to do this stuff? The answer is you should not trust them, okay? And that is why these reports, before they become part of the settlement, have to be submitted to this CMS office, this, we mentioned a minute ago, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and they have to review it. Now, sometimes what will happen is they'll look at it and they'll say, all right, y'all said this should be $100,000. It'll come back and they'll have their own report and they'll say, no, it needs to be $150,000. So then at that point, the insurance company has a few choices. Number one, they can say, all right, we'll go ahead and increase the MSA payout and you get more money for your injuries. Great. Or they can say, no, we're not doing that. We're going to leave the medicals open and we'll just settle the other part of the case, the indemnity portion. Or they can just say, we're walking away from this. We're not going to settle it, in which case everything sort of stays like it is. And unfortunately, your settlement is blown. And that does happen sometimes. Usually they're fairly close between CMS and what these companies say. So how long does this, you say it has to be submitted to CMS, how long does this process take? I mean, it's going to hold up things a little bit. And what we're seeing now, we're in the winter of 2021, and typically we're seeing between 6 weeks and 2 months for this process to take place. Once CMS has given this report their quote-unquote blessing, okay, they say, yes, this is sufficient, then you're golden. It doesn't matter how much it is, because if the money runs out, you can go to Medicare. Assuming that you've proven that you've spent it right, Medicare is going to cover you and you're set. The bottom line in all of this is all not just for Medicare's protection, but it's for your protection as well. Now, remember we said that there's a less strict category, and that is really pertaining to all the folks that are not current Medicare recipients, nor are they probably going to be one anytime soon, okay? And we still recommend in many of those cases, especially if it's a fairly large settlement, that these folks get a Medicare set-aside done anyway. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be in a formal report, number one. And number two, it doesn't have to be submitted to CMS. But why do we do this? Let's say, God forbid, 6 months out from settlement or just a little while after settlement, you get in a car accident. And although it looked like you were going to be able to work somewhere after your settlement, all of a sudden now you can't work anywhere. And you need to go ahead and turn to Social Security disability to get your disability, which means you're going to qualify for Medicare within 29 months of your disability. So in that situation, if you were disabled and you became qualified for Medicare and you didn't do anything in your settlement to protect Medicare's interests, Medicare might give you a hard time. They might look back at it and say, look, you got money for your future injuries. Those injuries were made worse by this car accident you had subsequently, and we're not going to cover anything. We're not going to cover you for that, okay, because this all pertains to your work injuries. But what we'll do is we'll say, look, we're going to set aside some guesstimate of what your future medicals might be. Could be $5,000, could be $10,000, sometimes a little more, depending on what your care looks like. In other words, if you've been treating steadily for your injuries, but you want to settle, and it looks like you kind of reached a medical plateau, and it makes sense to settle your case, your Medicare set-aside is probably going to be a little bit more because you're under ongoing treatment. Whereas if you haven't treated for a year at all for your injuries, your Medicare set-aside is probably that we recite. Again, it's just a figure that we recite in your settlement documents, probably going to be a lot less. And again, really the way you should treat that is almost exactly the same as the way you're going to treat it for the formal, more strict Medicare set-aside. The big difference is you don't have to submit that anywhere. You don't have to get it approved by anybody. We're just going to recite it in the documents. And I always tell folks, and I recommend very strongly, that you do the same kind of thing, set up a separate bank account, call it your Medicare set-aside account, and put that money in there and only use it for your work injuries. If 30 months go by after the settlement and you don't need to touch that money really for your work injuries. You find that there's still some money in there, and you're working, you're back at work, you're doing pretty good, you're feeling okay, and you don't think you're going to become disabled, and you don't plan to file for disability, go ahead and close out the account, take that money and go throw yourself a party. Why do we do this? Because that's going to be enough time to where you probably don't have to worry about Medicare looking back and giving you any trouble. Trust me, I know this stuff can make your head spin, and I apologize if it's been a little bit, kind of convoluted at times and if it wasn't clear. But really all you got to do is keep remembering the main concept that the fundamental idea, okay, of Medicare set-aside is to prevent double dipping, okay, prevent you to get money for your future medical care and your settlement and then turn around and try to get that same money from Medicare, right? And the second thing to remember is, look, it's all designed to protect not only Medicare, but also you. So you don't get dinged, so to speak, by Medicare down the line when they say, oh, we're not going to cover you for these injuries ever because you didn't protect our interest, okay? So I hope that's been useful for you. If you have any questions about Medicare set-asides or anything having to do with this, any other subject in workers' comp, please don't hesitate to call us. I'm Joe Miller, workers' compensation attorney. I wish you all a blessed day. Take care. Joe Miller out.